You have asked this question. Maybe not out loud. Maybe just in the quiet of 3 a.m. when you cannot sleep. Maybe while scrolling through their social media, watching them be the person with someone else that they never managed to be with you. Maybe the 100th time you found yourself rehearsing what you would say if they ever really, genuinely, finally came back. Different. Can they change? And the reason you are still asking, the reason this question will not leave you alone, no matter how many times you think you have settled it, is not because you are naive. It is because the answer is not simple. And everyone who tells you it is simple, everyone who gives you the clean yes or the clean no, without the complicated middle, is leaving out the part that actually matters. This video is going to give you the honest answer. Not the answer that feels good. Not the answer that makes the hope easier or the leaving easier. The actual answer, with all its complexity and all its implications. And I am going to tell you something at the very end of this video that is more important than whether they can change or cannot. Something that changes the question entirely. Stay. Let me start with what the research actually says, because this is where most videos on this topic get it wrong. They either tell you narcissists never change, and that feels validating, but it is not entirely true. Or they tell you change is possible if they really want it. And that is technically true, but so incomplete as to be functionally useless. Here is what the research actually shows. A 2024 study, published in a peer-reviewed journal, followed 8 patients with diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder through 2.5 to 5 years of intensive psychotherapy. All 8 improved. By the end of treatment, none of them met the diagnostic criteria for NPD anymore. Their scores on the diagnostic interview for narcissism dropped dramatically. Their functioning in relationships, work, and life improved significantly. All 8. So yes, change is possible. Now here is the part that matters. What did those 8 people have in common? They sought therapy themselves, not because a partner demanded it, not as a manipulation to prevent someone leaving, not as a performance of willingness. They entered therapy because something in them, some crack in the certainty that they were fine and everyone else was the problem, had opened enough to allow for the possibility that they needed help. They stayed for years. 2.5 to 5 years of intensive, consistent therapeutic work. Not a few months. Not occasional sessions when things felt bad. Years. They were willing to look at the parts of themselves they had spent their entire lives protecting themselves from seeing. The shame underneath the grandiosity. The terror underneath the entitlement. The wound that the whole construction was built to cover. That is what change requires. And now I need to tell you something about the narcissist in your life. The one you are asking about. The one whose change you are hoping for, or waiting for, or bargaining with yourself about. Are they in therapy? They sought themselves. Not therapy they entered because you gave an ultimatum. Not therapy they agreed to as a condition of you staying. Not therapy they attend when they feel like it, or when they want to prove something. Therapy they walked into because something inside them recognized that they were the problem. That is the first gate. And most narcissists never walk through it. Not because change is impossible for them as human beings, because narcissistic personality disorder, by its very structure, makes the recognition required for that first step almost neurologically unavailable. Here is why. Narcissism is built on a construction, a false self assembled to protect a core of unbearable shame and emptiness from ever being seen or felt. The construction requires that everything that goes wrong is someone else's fault, that every relationship that fails was the other person's failure, that every criticism is persecution, that every problem is external. Because if anything is their fault, if they are the problem, the construction collapses. And underneath the construction is the thing the construction was built to avoid: the emptiness, the shame, the terror of being simply not enough. Change requires them to look directly at that, to sit with it, to feel it, to let a therapist take them toward it rather than away. For most people, that is possible because most people have a stable enough sense of self that they can survive looking at their own flaws. For a person whose entire architecture is built to prevent exactly that, whose survival has depended on never having to feel that particular feeling, it is not just difficult. It is the most terrifying thing imaginable. And this is why the statistics are what they are.
Less than 5% of people with narcissistic personality disorder ever enter meaningful treatment. Of those who do, many drop out when the therapy gets close to the core. When the therapist starts asking the questions that would require the construction to crack. They find a reason to leave. The therapist is too confrontational. The approach is not right. They have learned enough. They are better now. The construction protects itself. And here's the part nobody tells you. The most dangerous version of apparent change, the one that pulls people back in, is not real change. It is the performance of change. A narcissist who has learned that displaying vulnerability gets supply, who has figured out that saying the right words, "I see what I did, I understand how I hurt you, I want to be different," produces the result they want. Who has discovered that performing change is a more effective strategy for keeping you than any previous strategy. The performance feels like change. It looks like change. It says all the words of change. And your nervous system, trained by years of intermittent reinforcement to respond to the warmth after the cold, responds to it like the real thing. Because it wants to. Because the alternative, accepting that the person is not going to change, requires a grief so profound that most people will choose the performance over the grief, almost every time. Now I need to stop here and speak to you directly, because I know what is happening right now. You are trying to figure out which category your person falls into, real change or performance of change. And you want me to give you a way to tell. I am going to. But first, I need to tell you why most people cannot see it, even when the signs are right in front of them. The reason is this. Your nervous system was trained, through years of exactly the kind of relationship a narcissist creates, to interpret their apparent vulnerability as real vulnerability, to read their softness after cruelty as genuine remorse, to experience their moments of apparent insight as the breakthrough you always believed was coming. You were conditioned, through intermittent reinforcement, through trauma bonding, through the specific neurological effects of prolonged exposure to this kind of relationship, to want the performance to be real. And wanting something to be real does not disqualify your perception, but it does affect it. Here is how to tell the difference. Real change has specific characteristics. It is consistent over time, not just when there is a consequence, not just when the relationship is at stake, not just when something is being lost.
consistent, in ordinary moments, when there is nothing to gain from performing. It is self-originated, not in response to your feedback, not because you asked for it, not because you made it a condition of staying. They came to the recognition themselves, through their own internal process, through therapy they sought, through a crisis that cracked something open. It involves accountability without deflection. Not, "I understand why you see it that way." Not, "I can see how my behavior affected you," but also, just, "I did something harmful. It was wrong." No additional clause, no redirection back to your behavior, no eventual return to why they were actually the victim. It involves them tolerating your anger without making your anger the problem. Because real change means being able to hear that they caused harm without the hearing of it becoming a performance of suffering that requires you to comfort them. And it is visible to people outside your relationship, not just in their behavior with you, where they have the most incentive to perform, but in how they treat people they have nothing to gain from. Service workers, people they will never see again, people with nothing to offer. That is where character lives. Now, most importantly, the thing I promised you at the beginning, the thing that is more important than whether they can change. Here it is. The question of whether they can change is the wrong question for you to be asking. Not because the answer does not matter, because making their potential change the organizing question of your life keeps you oriented toward them. It puts your focus on their interior, their growth, their process, their timeline. When the question that actually determines your future is not whether they can change, it is whether you are going to wait to find out. And there is a profound difference between those two things. Someone who is genuinely changing does not need you to wait. They are changing because something in them has decided to. That process is theirs. It is happening because of their own recognition, their own commitment, their own work. If it is real, it will still be real after you have left. If it stops when you leave, if the motivation for change was keeping you rather than becoming different, it was not change. It was strategy.
And you do not owe anyone the time it takes to find out which one it is. You are not required to be the variable that tests the hypothesis. You are allowed to make decisions about your own life based on behavior over time that you have already witnessed. You have already witnessed it. You do not need more data. The question is not whether they can change. The question is what you are going to do with what you already know. And what you already know is this: they hurt you repeatedly, in specific ways, with specific effects on your nervous system, your sense of self, your ability to trust your own perception. That is not a small thing. That is not something that requires more information before you can respond to it. And whatever they do or do not become, whatever work they do or do not find their way to, your healing does not wait for the answer to the question you have been asking. Your healing starts when you stop making their potential the organizing principle of your present. And it continues, slowly, imperfectly, with enormous patience for yourself, regardless of what they choose. They get to choose whether they change. You get to choose whether you wait. Those are separate decisions. Yours is the one that determines your future. Choose accordingly.
If this video gave you permission to stop waiting for an answer that was never yours to need, please share it with one person who is still asking the question and still hoping the asking will eventually produce a different answer. Tell them the question they are actually asking. Subscribe, because this channel exists to give you the clarity that makes the right question visible. I will see you in the next one.